My son's wife laughed first. That thin, sharp little laugh of hers that always made me feel as if I'd shown up to a place where I no longer belonged. She has no access to her accounts, Lindsay said, tapping her perfect nails on the banker's desk as if she were explaining something obvious about a helpless old woman. And for a moment, I simply sat there, hands folded on my lap, letting her talk about me as if I weren't in the room at all. At 78, you grow used to disappearing in plain sight, but you never quite stop feeling the sting. The bank manager, Mr. Keller, cleared his throat. A gentle man, patient eyes kind enough not to look surprised. Actually, he said, turning the monitor slightly toward me, not toward her. Mrs. Glay is the only person with full access and no limitations have been placed on her accounts. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. The silence that followed was satisfaction enough. Lindsay's face tightened barely, but I'd learned to read these little twitches. The woman could hide irritation the way some women hide gray roots quickly, but not perfectly. "Oh," she murmured, straightening in the chair. "I must have misunderstood." She didn't look at me when she said it. She never did when she was wrong. Mr. Keller continued, "You mentioned wanting to discuss a change in permissions, Mrs. Glay. You don't have to decide today." I nodded, though my mind was drifting elsewhere, back through years of small humiliations brushed aside with polite smiles. I had come here because my son Eric said it would be safer if we organized my finances. He said the world wasn't made for elderly people navigating online banking. He said I should let them simplify things. And I foolishly had walked in, believing a conversation awaited me. Instead, I found a conclusion already drawn, signed and stamped without me. "I'd prefer," I said slowly, choosing each word the way my late husband chose screws in his workshop to keep everything as it is for now. Lindsay gave me that soft, patronizing smile people reserve for stubborn children. "Mom, we're just trying to help. You get so overwhelmed with paperwork." Paperwork. I had been a bookkeeper for 38 years. I could calculate tax returns in my sleep up until the year I retired. But of course, in their minds, memory weakens the moment your hair turns silver. You stop being trusted long before you stop being capable. "I'm not overwhelmed," I said quietly. Mr. Keller looked at me, then not at the older woman people assumed was confused, but at someone who understood exactly what was being taken from her. "Take all the time you need," he said gently. When we walked out of the office, the late winter sun felt colder than it should have. Lindsay marched ahead, heels clicking with irritation. Eric trailed behind her shoulders, stiff. My sweet boy. Once when he was little, he used to run back to take my hand at every curb, afraid I would fall. Now he didn't look at me. That was a different kind of stumbling, I suppose. Outside by their car, Lindsay finally turned toward me. "You know, it would have been easier for everyone if you just signed the paperwork." Her voice was sugary, but her eyes were sharp. "I imagine it would," I answered. She opened her door with a flourish. "Think about what's practical. Okay, you're not young anymore. Age, always. Age. The excuse people use when they want permission to take pieces of your life away." I'll think I said, but the truth was the thinking had already begun. Not because of their suggestion, but because of that laugh in the bank and the certainty behind it. The certainty that I was someone who couldn't possibly hold the keys to her own life anymore. I walked to the bus stop instead of accepting their offer to drive me home. The cold breeze steadied me. I realized something on that short walk. If I didn't start holding on to myself soon, there would be nothing left to hold. And maybe, just maybe, this was the day I stopped being someone who allowed herself to disappear. When I came home that afternoon, the house felt heavier than usual, as if it too had overheard the conversation at the bank and was now carrying the weight of it with me. I hung my coat on the hallway chair, the one my husband Walter carved 40 years ago. and for a moment, I rested my hand on the worn wooden back. It grounded me the way his voice once did. Quiet strength. Nothing dramatic, just presence. The kettle whistled before I even realized I'd turned it on. Habit. Tea solves nothing, but it fills the silence enough that you can breathe in it. I poured it, sat down at the kitchen table, and let the steam blur the room for a moment. Funny how memory works. You live decades, and yet the things that surface are never the big events. Today, it was something small. Eric at 12 sitting at this same table telling me he'd gotten a bad grade and was terrified of disappointing us. Walter laughed, pulled him into a hug, and said, "Son, you're not a grade, you're a person." And Eric cried into his father's shirt, relieved. Where did that boy go? Or maybe the question is harsher. When did we stop being the people he wanted to protect? The tea cooled, untouched. I walked into the living room and sat in Walter's old recliner. Only one light was on. The rest of the house was dim the way it gets in late afternoon. The quiet pressed on me. Not hostile, just honest. It makes you see things you've avoided seeing. I thought about the last few years. How many times had Lindsay spoken over me, corrected me in front of others, taken the phone from my hand because I might misunderstand the bank representative? How many times had Eric asked for help just for a month, and then another and another? It all accumulated in small slices, like someone trimming pieces off you when you're not looking. It happened so gradually you almost thanked them for it. Somewhere in the drawer beneath the TV were envelopes, dozens of them, receipts for bills I had paid for their home renovation, their debts, their car insurance, their vacations. I had kept every slip not out of resentment, but out of old habit. Bookkeepers file everything. We record the truth even when no one else wants to. I opened the drawer. It wasn't anger that rose in me. Not yet. It was sadness. Heavy, slow, like watching your favorite tree lose its branches one storm at a time. I looked at receipt after receipt, and in each one I saw a misplaced hope. If I help them this once, maybe it will bring us closer again. But help that isn't appreciated becomes obligation, and obligation, when demanded, becomes servitude. My hands trembled slightly, and I sat down again, not from weakness, from the realization that I had lived the last decade believing that love could be earned with generosity. Walter would have shaken his head. He always said, "Martha, affection that must be purchased is never affection you can trust." I didn't listen. Grief makes fools of us all. The phone buzzed. A message from Eric. "Thanks again for coming today. We'll talk later about paperwork. It really is for your own good, for my own good." That phrase, too, trims a little piece off you. I placed the phone face down. The sun dipped behind the neighbor's roof and the house darkened further. I didn't turn the lights on. The shadows helped me see more clearly. I understood sitting in that dim room that today had simply opened a crack, a small, sharp one, in the shell I'd built around myself. A shell made of politeness, compliance, and the hope that if I stayed quiet, no one would take more from me. But cracks widen. Cracks let the truth in. And the truth was simple. I had allowed myself to become useful instead of loved, convenient, instead of respected, present, only in ways that benefited others. I wasn't angry, not yet, but something in me was waking. An old part of myself, the one that once stood firm through hard years, through Walter's illness, through those long days when I paid bills alone and held the family together without applause. I poured out the cold tea and washed the cup. The night settled softly around the house, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel afraid of the silence. It felt almost companionable, and somewhere inside it, a thought formed, steady, solid, undeniable. If I don't draw the line now, they will erase me completely. That was the truth I carried to bed with me, and the truth that wouldn't let me sleep. The next day, I woke with the kind of heaviness that sits, not in the body but in the mind. A quiet weight, the sort that tells you the world has shifted a little, even if no one else notices. I moved slowly through the morning, washed my face, brushed my thinning hair, buttoned my cardigan. Simple things, familiar things. They steadied me. Around noon, I received a message from my son. "Don't forget dinner tonight at our place, 6:00 p.m. As if I were a child prone to forgetting. As if he hadn't already sent that same reminder twice this week. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Dinner. Yes, the weekly ritual. The one I never declined even when I should have. A habit of affection from someone who no longer offered much of it in return. I replied with a single word. Coming. But by the time I arrived at their house, a tall, polished townhouse I'd helped pay for something in the air felt off. The driveway was full of unfamiliar cars. The living room glowed through the windows, warm and loud, in a way it never was for our regular dinners. I could see silhouettes moving, hear laughter drifting into the cold evening air. Celebration laughter. Not casual, not weekly. Something more. I rang the doorbell. No one came. I waited. Finally, Lindsay opened the door wearing a dress far too fancy for a simple family meal. Her eyes flicked over me. My old coat, my flat shoes, my folded hands. "Oh," she said, as if spotting a distant acquaintance she barely recognized. "You're here." "Yes," I answered softly. Eric reminded me, 6. She hesitated just for a second, but it was enough. Inside, voices rose, clinking glasses, warmth that had nothing to do with me. I stepped aside as a couple squeezed past her, laughing. They didn't even glance my way. "What's all this?" I asked. Before she could answer, Eric appeared behind her. The look on his face, that startled moment of guilt, told me everything before he spoke. "Mom," he said, lowering his voice. "It's just a small thing, a last-minute get-together, work friends." I nodded once. "And you forgot to mention it to me." He exhaled, annoyed. The way people sigh when they think patience is wasted on someone. "Mom, we didn't think you'd be comfortable. It's going to be loud and chaotic. You prefer quieter evenings." There it was again. The small cut disguised as concern. "I see," I said. "But when you invited me earlier this week, what kind of evening did you think it would be?" He didn't answer. Instead, Lindsay touched his arm lightly, a gesture I'd come to recognize. "Let me handle this." Her fingers were always too tightly curled when she was trying very hard to sound gentle. "We just didn't want you to feel out of place," she said, smiling. Always smiling, out of place at my son's home. On an evening, he had asked me to come. Behind them, the room brightened as someone lit candles on a cake with congratulations written across the top in looping gold. A promotion, perhaps a milestone, something they deemed worth celebrating with everyone except the woman who had once worked double shifts to buy Eric school shoes. He wouldn't be ashamed of. I stood there watching the scene unfold behind their shoulders and felt the cold creep into my hands. Not bitterness, clarity. The realization that this wasn't an accident, not the first slight, not an isolated oversight. It was a pattern, a decision made long ago, perhaps unconsciously, that I was decorative, optional, easy to exclude. "Mom," Eric said finally, "why don't we do dinner another night? Something just for us, quiet, proper." He said proper, as if this were a polite compromise. As if I were a stubborn guest refusing to cooperate, Lindsay added softly, "Yes, another night would be better." Better for whom? I looked at both of them not with anger, but with a kind of tenderness for my own foolish hope. For all the times I'd excused these moments, smoothed them over, whispered to myself that they hadn't meant it. "All right," I said, stepping back. Another night. Relief washed over their faces. Too quickly, too visibly. Eric closed the door without waiting to see if I'd turned away. Outside, the wind was colder. The streetlights flickered on one by one. I stood on the sidewalk as the laughter rose behind the closed door. I wasn't angry, but something inside me, something long asleep, drew a quiet breath. I walked home, slowly feeling the night gather around me, and with every step I understood a little more. This was no misunderstanding. This was a choice, and soon I would have to make mine. I didn't sleep that night. Not fully. I closed my eyes, yes, but the mind has its own stubborn ways of staying awake. It picks through memories like an old seamstress sorting buttons, turning each over, weighing it, rejecting none. And somewhere in those restless hours, I saw things I hadn't let myself see before. Not in scenes of drama, but in small moments, the ones that tell the truth better than shouting ever could. By morning, the house felt colder, as if the walls themselves sensed that something in me had tilted off its old axis. I moved slowly through the kitchen, touching the familiar things, the chipped mug. Walter loved the spice jars with the faded labels, the little radio that hummed static more often than music. These objects had outlasted storms my family never saw. Maybe they would outlast this one too. Around noon, a knock sounded at the door. Gentle, hesitant. Not Eric's hurried tapping. Not Lindsay's sharp little pecks. This was softer kind, the sort of knock someone uses when they're afraid you might be sleeping. I opened the door to see my granddaughter. Anna stood there with her backpack slung over one shoulder, cheeks flushed from the cold, her eyes, those calm, thoughtful eyes, searching my face before she spoke. "Grandma," she said, "can I come in?" I stepped aside. No need to ask why she was here. Anna was the only one in the family who ever came without needing something. In the kitchen, she pulled out a chair but didn't sit until I sat first. A small gesture. Respect woven into habit. Funny how rare that becomes. "I heard there was a party last night," she said gently. I kept my hands wrapped around my mug, warming them. A small gathering, nothing important. She looked at me the way Walter used to when I claimed I was fine after slipping on the porch, with quiet disbelief. "Dad said the whole thing was last minute," she continued. "But that's not true, is it? I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to." Some truths hover in the air even before they're spoken. Anna finally sat, folded her hands, and said in a low voice, "I knew something was wrong when Mom told me not to mention it to you. That's why I came today." Her words were soft, but they landed deep. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The ticking of the kitchen clock filled the room like a gentle, persistent heartbeat. "You're not imagining it," I said finally. They didn't forget. They decided. Anna's face tightened. Hurt first, then anger, then something like shame, as if she were responsible for the choices of adults who should have known better. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You've done nothing wrong," I said. "Nothing at all." She blinked quickly the way young people do when they refuse to cry. I poured her tea. It always struck me how this simple act could still make me feel necessary, as if there were at least one person left in the world who didn't see me as a burden. "Grandma," she said after a moment, "why do you let them treat you like this?" There was no accusation in her voice, only sadness. I took a long breath. Because sometimes when you've loved someone for so long, you start confusing what they were with what they are, and you keep hoping the old version will return. Anna nodded slowly, but it doesn't. "No," I said, "it rarely does." She leaned forward, elbows on the table the way her father used to when he was small. "So what are you going to do?" I looked at her, then really looked, and saw a young woman who still believed that people could stand up for themselves, even at 78. Someone who still thought life changed because we decided to change it. What a gift that hope was. And though I didn't answer right away, I felt the truth forming in me. Quiet but steady. I'm thinking I said, for the first time in a long while, I'm thinking about myself. Anna reached out and took my hand. Her grip was warm, firm, not pitying, simply present. "You deserve better than them," she whispered. The words sank into me like slow sunlight, not because they were new, but because I finally felt ready to believe them. Outside, the wind rattled the old maple branches against the window. Inside, the air shifted gently but unmistakably. When Anna left later that afternoon, she hugged me longer than usual. And when the house grew quiet again, I walked to the living room, opened the drawer with the old receipts, and ran my fingers along the edges. I wasn't making decisions yet, but I was no longer avoiding them. Sometimes change begins not with action, but with the simple, stubborn refusal to pretend everything is fine. And I had finally reached that refusal. I waited until evening before opening the drawer again. Not because I needed more time. No, the truth was simpler. I needed calm. Decisions made in anger grow crooked like trees bent by the wind. I didn't want crookedness in my life anymore. The drawer slid open with a soft scrape. Inside lay the envelopes stacked so neatly you'd think they contained something precious, but they held only receipts, small histories of my silence. I took out the thickest bundle and carried it to the table. The kitchen light hummed overhead, a low, steady sound. It felt right, like a companion rather than a nuisance. I unfolded the first slip, a contractor's bill from 6 years ago, Eric's burst pipe. He'd shown up at my door dripping water on my rug, agitated, already rehearsing excuses. "Mom, just until payday. I'll return every cent." Payday became next month. Next month became never. Another receipt. Lindsay's dental procedure. "Cosmetic not necessary," she had said cheerfully. "But I can't show up to client meetings looking like this." She gestured at a perfectly normal tooth, and I'd written a check before she finished talking. I remember thinking she was just nervous about appearances. Now I wonder if she ever even felt nervous. Page after page, ink faded dates stretching back through the years like footsteps leading away from who I used to be. Every line told the same story. I gave and they forgot. I gave and they expected. I gave and they grew hungrier. Some might say, I should have set boundaries long ago. But boundaries are easier to draw when you're not afraid of losing the little closeness that still remains. After Walter died, the kids became the only thread tying me to any sense of family. I clung to that thread so tightly it cut into my hands. I set the receipts aside and reached for a notebook, a simple blue one I kept hidden behind the cookbooks. Inside were figures I'd never shown anyone. Notes on my savings investments bank accounts. I'm not wealthy, but I am not helpless either. Years of working with numbers had taught me one thing. Control rests with the one who signs the checks. A quiet strength rose in me, then not dramatic, not triumphant, just firm. A strength I had once known well before grief and loneliness taught me to shrink myself to fit the comfort of others. I remembered the look on Mr. Keller's face at the bank. Respect, not pity, not impatience. Respect. It had been so long since anyone looked at me that way that I almost didn't recognize the feeling. I turned to a blank page and began listing every recurring payment connected to Eric's household. Mortgage supplements, insurance school fees, even their streaming services. I had allowed myself to become the invisible engine behind their life, and engines, when taken for granted, eventually stall. Halfway down the list, I stopped. My hands rested quietly on the paper. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't upset. I felt awake as if someone had opened a window in a room that had been closed too long. The truth was simple. They had built their comfort on my silence, and I had given them the blueprint. I closed the notebook gently. No dramatic vows, no sweeping declarations. Those belonged to younger people. What I felt was quieter, more certain. It was time to take my life back. Not out of spite, but out of dignity. And though I hadn't yet told anyone, not even Anna, my next step was already forming in the back of my mind, clear and practical. Tomorrow, I would go to the bank, not to argue, not to explain myself, but to begin undoing 15 years of quiet surrender. The house felt still when I stood up, as if listening, as if approving. And for the first time in many, many years, I felt like the woman Walter once believed I was, steady, capable, unwilling to be erased. I woke earlier than usual the next morning, long before the sun pushed its first pale line across the sky. At my age, waking early isn't uncommon, but this felt different. There was no heaviness, no lingering ache of yesterday's thoughts. Instead, there was clarity, the kind that arrives only when you finally decided to stop looking away. I dressed slowly, choosing my dark gray coat, the one Walter always said made me look capable. Funny how a single word can travel through decades and still hold shape. Capable. I wanted to feel that way again. The air outside was sharp cold enough to sting the lungs. I walked to the bus stop instead of calling a taxi. The steady rhythm of my steps helped settle my mind. By the time I reached the bank's double glass doors, my heart wasn't racing. It was simply steady, ready. Inside, the warmth surprised me. Banks used to feel intimidating. Marble counters, stern faces, but this one was quiet, modern, almost gentle. Mr. Keller noticed me right away. He stood from his desk with a soft smile, not the kind people reserve for the elderly, but the kind they give to someone expected. "Mrs. Glay," he said, "I wondered if you'd return today. So did I." I answered truthfully. He gestured toward his office. We walked in together, and he closed the door behind us. I sat down, folded my hands, and for a moment looked at the framed photograph on his desk. His wife, 2 little boys, a family that still looked at one another with warmth. I remembered that kind of warmth once. "What can I help you with today?" he asked gently. I opened my notebook, the blue one I had filled last night, and placed it between us. I'd like to cancel all recurring payments connected to my son's household, I said. My voice didn't waver. Every single one. Mr. Keller didn't look surprised. He merely nodded respectfully. "We can certainly do that. It may take a few minutes." And I added, "I want to revoke any pending permissions or access requests Eric or his wife may have made, even informal ones." This time, Mr. Keller's eyebrows lifted slightly, not in judgment, but in acknowledgement, the way a man might lift his hat in the presence of something worth noting. "Consider it done," he said. He typed for a long moment, the soft clack of keys, steady and calm. When he finished, he turned the monitor toward me again, just as he had the day before. "Everything is frozen," he said. "All authorizations removed. Your accounts are under your control alone, my control alone." 3 simple words, and yet they felt like a door unlocking. "Do you want formal statements printed?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "One for me, one for my lawyer." He nodded. A very wise step. I didn't tell him how long it had taken me to become wise. When the papers were ready, he slid them toward me neatly with the same care a librarian uses for old books. I signed each page slowly, deliberately, the way Walter used to sign birthday cards, as if signing meant promising something. And in a way, it did. When we finished, Mr. Keller walked me to the front. "If you ever need assistance," he said softly, "you can always come to me directly." I believed him. Outside, the cold hit my face again, but this time it felt invigorating, almost like waking from a long sleep. I didn't rush to the bus stop. I let myself move slowly, allowing the moment to settle into me. Halfway down the street, my phone buzzed. A message from Eric. "Mom, the mortgage payment bounced. Is something wrong with the account?" Then another. "Call me as soon as you see this." I stared at the screen, feeling nothing sharp, no guilt, no fear, only a quiet certainty. For years, I had been the emergency fund, the soft landing, the invisible safety net. And like all nets, I had been stretched thin. Today, I had finally gathered the threads back into my own hands. I slipped the phone into my pocket without replying. The wind rustled the bare branches overhead, making a sound like distant applause. Silly thought, perhaps, but comforting. As I approached the bus stop, I felt taller somehow, though my back remained as curved as ever. Dignity does that. It straightens places the body cannot. Tomorrow I would visit my lawyer. Today I had reclaimed myself, and that at 78 felt like the bravest thing I'd done in years. Eric began calling before I even stepped off the bus. First once, then again before the screen dimmed, then again immediately after. I let it ring. The sound vibrated against my coat pocket like a trapped insect, desperate to escape. For years, that sound had meant urgency. Someone needed me. Someone depended on me. But now it sounded different. Now it sounded like a door I no longer felt compelled to open. By the time I reached my front walkway, the calls had turned into messages. "Mom, call me." The utilities didn't go through either. "Something's wrong. Please answer. Please." The word he never used unless he felt cornered. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. My house welcomed me with its familiar stillness, the scent of old books, the faint lavender powder I used yesterday, the worn carpet that had held my footsteps for decades, a house that had never demanded anything from me, a house that had never made me feel like a burden. I set the papers from the bank on the kitchen table. The official stamps looked so ordinary, so harmless. But I knew better. Those quiet ink marks represented the first true shift in the balance of my life. I was pouring myself tea when the knocking came. Loud, urgent, not the gentle knock of someone concerned. This was the pounding of someone who believed he still had the right to enter without permission. I opened the door. Eric stood there, flushed from the cold, breathing unevenly. He looked older than he should at 48, but perhaps that was because he had never learned to sit with discomfort, only to avoid it. "Mom," he said, pushing past me before I could answer. "What's going on? The bank says payments are frozen." He stood in the hallway, staring at me as if expecting me to apologize, as if confusion should be my natural state. "Eric," I said softly, closing the door behind him. "You need to lower your voice." "I'm not yelling," he said loudly, "but everything is a mess right now. The mortgage, the insurance, the card bill all declined. Did you touch something? Did someone scam you?" "Scam?" The irony almost made me smile. "No," I said. "No one scammed me." He exhaled, impatient. "Okay, so what happened? The bank said you changed something, but that's impossible." "You wouldn't, I did." He froze mid-sentence. A strange, flickering expression crossed his face. Surprise, disbelief, then something even sharper. Fear. "You." He swallowed. "You canceled everything." "Yes." Why his voice cracked, losing its practiced authority. "Mom, why would you do that?" I walked past him into the kitchen, letting him follow like he used to when he was small. Only back then, he followed with trust, not indignation. "I had my reasons," I said. "That's not an answer. It's the only one you'll get right now." He stared at me, eyes narrowing with a kind of wounded confusion only someone who feels entitled can feel. "This affects all of us, Mom. You can't just make decisions like this." I said quietly when they concerned my money. He blinked as if I'd spoken a foreign language. For years, my resources had been a shared reservoir, something they dipped into automatically without gratitude or hesitation. The idea that it belonged to me first was unexpected. "Mom, we have responsibilities," he insisted. "Bills, commitments, Toby's school fees." "I know," I replied. "And they're your responsibilities, not mine." He ran a hand through his hair, the same gesture he used as a child, when he broke something and didn't know how to explain it. "This isn't like you," he said finally. "You're being unreasonable." Unreasonable, a word used for women who stop prioritizing everyone else. I sat down at the table. "Eric," I said softly. "For years I've helped because I wanted to, but help turned into expectation, then into obligation, and somewhere in there, respect disappeared." He stood very still. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said, meeting his eyes, "that I don't feel seen. Not as a mother, not as a person." He opened his mouth, closed it again, then said the only thing he could think of. "Is this because of last night, one small lie, one quiet exclusion, one evening without me?" But that wasn't the root, only the spark. "This is because of many nights," I answered. Silence settled between us, dense and unavoidable. He looked around the kitchen then, as if seeing it for the first time. The neat stack of papers, the organized receipts, the calm order of a life he assumed was falling apart. "You've really done this," he whispered. "Yes." He let out a long, shaky breath. "Mom, we need that money. Then you'll have to find a way without me." He stared at me, and for the first time in many years, I saw a man, not a son. A man realizing that the foundation he'd relied on was no longer beneath him. "Please," he said finally, not commanding, not demanding, just asking. "Reconsider." I shook my head. No Eric, not this time. He left without slamming the door, which surprised me. Maybe he sensed the shift. Maybe he knew the ground had changed for both of us. When the silence returned, it felt different. Not lonely, not hollow, just honest. And I knew this was only the beginning. I thought Eric might return that evening perhaps with calmer words or a clearer head. But it wasn't Eric who showed up. It was Lindsay. Her knock was sharp, not frantic like his, but purposeful like someone announcing authority. I opened the door just enough to see her face. She was wearing a coat far too thin for winter, but her expression was what struck me. Composed, polished, and utterly certain she was about to fix a problem she believed I had caused. "May I come in?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already had. I stepped aside out of habit, not invitation. She walked in and immediately looked around, judging the neatness of my home, the way one inspects a hotel room for flaws. She set her purse on the table with a deliberate click. Eric told me what happened. She began taking a seat before I had the chance to offer one, and I think there's been a misunderstanding. I sat across from her, folding my hands. "There's no misunderstanding." She gave a soft laugh, the same one she used at the bank, the one that trimmed dignity from anything it touched. "Martha, we all know how confusing finances can become at your age. No one is blaming you, but you've caused real issues by freezing those payments." "My age," I repeated quietly. She waved a manicured hand. "It's nothing to be ashamed of, but we need to get things back in order. The mortgage, the insurance, the school fees, all of it depends on you being stable." I looked at her, at the confidence in her posture, at the certainty that she understood my life better than I did, that they all did. "Stable," I echoed. "Is that why you told Mr. Keller I had no access to my accounts?" For the first time, her expression faltered. "That was a miscommunication," she said quickly. "No," I replied, my voice steady. "It was an assumption and a convenient one." She sat straighter, realizing the conversation wasn't unfolding the way she had rehearsed. "Martha, you need to understand something. Eric and I have responsibilities. Our life depends on consistency. You've always supported us. Supported, I said. Or carried. Her mouth tightened. You're being dramatic, she answered. I shook my head gently. No, Lindsay, I am being clear. She inhaled sharply. Well, clarity goes both ways. Without your contribution, we'll fall behind. Do you realize what position you're putting us in? There it was. Not care, not concern, fear of losing comfort. Your position, I said softly, is yours to manage. She stared at me, unsettled. You're making a mistake. Perhaps I said, but it will be my mistake. She let out a small, incredulous laugh. I don't think you grasp how much you rely on us. I studied her face, not unkindly, not angrily, simply seeing her for the first time without excuses. And I don't think I replied you ever grasped how much you relied on me. Silence thick, unexpected. Her confidence wavered. She reached for her purse, then paused. Eric loves you, she said stiffly. We both do. We're just trying to help. I stood. Help begins with respect. I haven't felt that in a long time. For a moment, something vulnerable flickered across her expression. Irritation mixed with disbelief. But beneath it, the faintest hint of fear. Because she understood perhaps for the first time that the balance had shifted, that the woman she underestimated could no longer be steered or softened. She rose without another word and walked toward the door. Before stepping out, she said quietly, You'll call when you're ready to be reasonable. We can sort it out then. I met her gaze. I am reasonable. That's why I made the changes. The wind outside caught her hair as she stepped onto the porch. She hesitated as if waiting for me to call her back. I didn't. When the door closed, the silence that returned felt different. Not empty, not lonely, just mine. Eric came the next afternoon just as I knew he would. Not with Lindsay this time. No, he arrived alone, shoulders stiff, jaw tight. The way men look when they're preparing to say something they don't want to say but feel they must. He didn't knock loudly. 3 soft taps, almost hesitant, as if he wasn't sure what version of his mother would answer. I opened the door and stepped aside without a word. He entered quietly, removing his gloves with slow, distracted movements. I could tell he'd practiced what to say. Eric had never been good with unstructured conversations. His thoughts needed borders, scripts, explanations. Mom? He began standing in the middle of the living room like a visitor. I think we should talk. I nodded. Then sit. He sat on the edge of the sofa, elbows on his knees, hands clasped loosely. Not defensive, uncertain. A boy again, not a man. I sat across from him in Walter's recliner, feeling its familiar GV beneath me. I'm worried about you, he said. Too quickly, too rehearsed. Yesterday, everything happened so fast. You've always helped us, and then suddenly you changed everything. He looked up at me, waiting for me to explain away his discomfort. I changed what needed to be changed, I said. He exhaled through his nose, frustration simmering quietly. Mom, you don't understand how much this affects us. The house Toby's school. We built our plans with you in mind. Yes, I answered. That's the problem. He blinked, caught off guard. What do you mean? You built your life on the assumption that I would always say yes without asking if I should. He stared at me not angrily, but blankly, as if the idea simply didn't fit into any category he had for me. Mom, we're family, he said, finally. Families help each other. Help, I repeated, not depend on, not drain, not replace respect with expectation. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Silence settled between us, heavy but necessary. I never meant to take advantage of you, he said quietly. I know you didn't mean to, I replied, but intentions don't erase patterns. He swallowed hard. Is this because of the dinner? Because we didn't invite you? Mom, it wasn't deliberate. Things got busy and Eric, I said softly. I saw the celebration through the window. His face drained of color. "You lied," I continued. "Not to protect me, to exclude me." He looked down at his hands, thumbs rubbing together anxiously. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. He didn't argue, not because he agreed, but because he finally understood he couldn't reshape the truth anymore. After a long moment, he said, "I don't want things to fall apart between us." "They won't," I said, "unless you expect me to go back to the way things were." He looked up, something raw flickering in his eyes. "So that's it? You're done helping us." I didn't raise my voice, didn't let emotion twist the words. "I'm done sacrificing myself to stay included." He leaned back as if the chair had suddenly softened beneath him, the weight of reality finally settling on his shoulders. "I never realized you felt this way," he whispered. "I know," I said. "That's why I finally said it out loud." He rubbed his face with both hands, weary. "What do you want from me?" The question was honest, perhaps the first honest thing he'd said in years. "I want," I replied quietly, "for you to remember I'm a person, not a resource." He looked at me, then really looked, and for a moment I saw the boy who used to run to me with skinned knees asking if I was proud of him. "I'm sorry," he said, voice unsteady. "I should have been better." I nodded. "You still can be." He stood slowly as if unsure whether he was allowed to leave or expected to stay. "Mom, what happens now?" I rose and walked him to the door. "Now," I said gently, "you learn to stand without leaning on me, and I learn to stop offering myself as something to lean on." He hesitated on the porch, hands in his pockets, looking smaller than he had in years. "Will you let me visit?" he asked. "When you come as my son," I replied, "not as someone managing me." He nodded a small, humbled motion and walked down the steps. When the door closed behind him, the house settled into silence again. But this time, the silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like space. I didn't go to the lawyer's office out of anger. That emotion had settled days ago like dust after furniture is moved. What remained was something steadier, the understanding that if I didn't put my affairs in order, now someone else would try to do it for me later. And I had lived too long, endured too much to let the end of my story be written by people who saw me only when they needed something. The law firm was in a renovated Victorian house on Willow Street, its wide porch sagging slightly the way old porches do. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and paper. My attorney, M. Harper, greeted me with a warm, professional smile. A woman in her late 50s, brisk but not hurried, with eyes that suggested she listened more than she spoke. "Mrs. Glay," she said, shaking my hand. "Come in. You mentioned on the phone that you'd like to revise some documents." "Yes," I said. "Quite a few." We sat. She behind her oak desk, me in a chair that had probably been chosen for comfort, but still felt too modern for my taste. She opened her notebook. "Where would you like to begin?" I took a breath. Not a shaky one, a grounded one. "I want to update my will, and I want to establish a trust for my granddaughter, Anna, something she can access when she's older without interference." Miss Harper nodded, jotting notes. "A trust can absolutely be arranged. And regarding your will, are there beneficiaries you wish to remove or adjust?" I looked down at my folded hands. They were older hands now, thin and marked, but capable still. "Yes," I said finally. "I want to leave Eric something modest, a small sum out of courtesy, but nothing more, and nothing to his wife." Ms. Harper didn't react with surprise, only the calm understanding of someone who'd heard such decisions many times. "May I ask why?" she said gently. "Because," I answered, "a person should inherit responsibility only for what they valued, and they did not value me." She paused, then nodded. "Understood." I appreciated that she didn't ask for details. Still, for a moment, I felt compelled to offer some context. Not justification, just truth. They assumed my resources belonged to them. They planned their lives around it. But the only person who ever asked how I was my granddaughter. Miss Harper touched her pen to the page, thoughtful. A trust for Anna, then, and adjusted allocations for the others. Yes. We moved through other matters. Power of attorney medical directives, property deeds. She explained each document with clarity, never raising her voice, never speaking to me as though I were fragile. Respect. It's quiet but unmistakable when it's present. When she finished drafting the preliminary paperwork, she slid a set of pages toward me. Review these, and when you're ready, we'll finalize and notarize everything. I scanned the lines. They were clean, concise. Every choice reflected the shape of the life I was reclaiming. When I reached the trust section, I pictured Anna's gentle eyes, the way she held my hand without treating it as something breakable. She would be fine, more than fine. She would have something I never did, a start made from someone else's kindness. Everything looks right, I said. Miss Harper nodded. This is sensible planning, Mrs. Glay. It gives you control while ensuring your wishes are protected. Control not over others, over myself. As I signed the documents, a strange feeling washed over me. Not triumph, not relief, something quieter. The sensation of stepping back into my own skin after years of being talked over, managed, directed. When the last signature was done, Miss Harper collected the papers carefully. If you need anything revised in the future, just call. You're in full command of these decisions. Full command. 2 words I hadn't heard applied to me in a long time. When I stepped outside, the winter sun had shifted low enough to cast long shadows bright enough to warm my shoulders. I walked slowly toward the bus stop, the folder of documents tucked neatly under my arm. A man passing by held the door for me as I exited. Take your time, he said with an easy smile. I already was. For the first time in years, my future felt like it belonged to me again. Not borrowed, not assumed, not owed. Mine. Illness arrives differently at my age. It doesn't knock. It slips in through the cracks. A chill in the bones, a heaviness in the chest, a weariness that settles not on the body but behind the eyes. 2 days after meeting with my lawyer, I woke with that familiar weight pressing on my ribs. Not dangerous, just insistent. I made tea but couldn't taste it. The house felt colder, though the thermostat hadn't changed. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and lowered myself into Walter's old recliner. My breath came shallow, tired. Age is a patient visitor. It never rushes, but it always reminds. I wasn't frightened. I'd lived too long to fear discomfort. What I feared was being seen as fragile again, as someone who needed to be managed. So I didn't call Eric. I didn't call anyone. But Anna called me. Grandma, she said the moment I answered. You sound off. Are you all right? She hears everything. The tremor in a single word, a strain hidden beneath politeness. She must have inherited that from Walter. He could read silence better than most men read newspapers. I'm just tired, I said. It's nothing. Tired. How she pressed gently. I could have lied, but the truth felt safer with her. The kind that doesn't go away with sleep. She was at my house within 20 minutes. Anna rushed in with flushed cheeks and a grocery bag dangling from her wrist. Sit, she said softly, already dropping her coat over a chair. She unpacked soup crackers, ginger tea, 2 lemons, and a small jar of honey. Simple things, thoughtful things. Grandma, she said, kneeling beside me. You should have called and said what... I answered. That old age is doing what old age does. She frowned, placing a cool hand on my forehead. You're warm and you're pale. I'm 78. That's almost a job description. She didn't laugh. She didn't scold. She simply moved around the kitchen with soft efficiency, heating the soup, fixing the tea, pulling a blanket from the linen closet. She didn't treat me like someone fading. She treated me like someone valuable. Anna, I said, when she brought the tray over, you don't need to fuss. She looked up, eyes steady. I'm not fussing. I'm taking care of you. That's different. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not the illness, but the old knot of loneliness I'd tied myself into after Walter died. All those years believing I was alone simply because no one showed up. Yet here she was showing up. She stayed for hours, studying at the table while I drifted in and out of sleep. Every so often I'd open my eyes to find her watching me with that thoughtful expression of hers, protective but not possessive. Did my dad call you today? She asked quietly during one of those moments. No. Will he eventually when the consequences get too loud to ignore? She nodded, not surprised. Grandma, do you ever regret helping him all those years I considered that? Regret is a sharp word, too sharp for what I felt. No, I said finally. But I regret assuming help would return affection. That was my mistake. Anna reached for my hand under the blanket, giving it a warm, gentle squeeze. I'm glad you're doing what's best for you now. I closed my eyes again, not from exhaustion alone, but from gratitude. Gratitude that someone in this family had learned how to listen. Later, as evening settled into the walls, Anna made sure I had water, turned off the kitchen light, and laid a hand on my shoulder. I'll come back tomorrow, she said. Call me if you get worse. Promise. I promise, I whispered. After she left, the house grew quiet again, but not empty. Her kindness lingered, filling the space like soft light. And as I drifted toward sleep, one truth settled deeper than the ache in my bones. I wasn't doing all of this just to protect myself. I was doing it because someone in my life still deserved the best of me, and she would have it. I felt better the next morning, not fully restored, but steadier. My breath no longer dragged, and the ache behind my ribs had softened into something manageable. I moved through the house, slowly making tea, opening curtains, letting light settle into corners that had been dim for too long. But just as sunlight crept across the living room rug, a different kind of shadow appeared. Not in the room, but in my phone. A message from Lindsay. We need to talk immediately. No greeting, no question of how I was feeling, just urgency packaged as authority. A few minutes later, the second message arrived. I spoke to someone at the bank. They wouldn't give me details, but I know you changed something. This is serious. Serious A word people use when they feel their grip slipping. I set the phone down and continued with my tea. Illness teaches you patience, but it also sharpens your sense of what deserves your energy. That morning, their panic did not qualify. It wasn't until nearly 11 that the inevitable happened. A car door slammed outside, followed by footsteps on my walkway. Sharp, clipped steps. Steps that belonged to someone who believed she was marching toward a problem she intended to correct. I opened the door before she had the chance to knock. Lindsay stood there wrapped in a scarf too bright for her mood. Her expression was tight, brittle at the edges. You didn't answer my messages, she said. I wasn't obliged to, I replied. She brushed past me. The way people enter spaces they assume will yield to them. But when she stepped into the living room, something shifted. Maybe it was the stillness of the house, maybe the open folders on the table, maybe the realization that the person she expected to intimidate was no longer waiting to be told what to do. She turned to me sharply. Martha, this has gone far enough. The bank won't talk to me and Eric is beside himself. You've put us in an impossible situation. I sat down slowly in Walter's old chair, letting her energy collide with my calm. I haven't put you anywhere, I said softly. You put yourselves there. Her jaw tightened. We have a partnership in this family. Financial decisions affect all of us. A partnership requires consent. I answered, not assumption. She crossed her arms. You are being manipulated. Someone convinced you to change things. Yes, I said. I convinced myself. She blinked, thrown off balance for a moment, then recovered. I don't think you realize the consequences. Without your contributions, we're stretched thin. Very thin. That sounds difficult. I said, that sounds, she snapped, avoidable. I studied her carefully. Not unkindly, but realistically. She wasn't malicious. She was entitled. Entitlement grows quietly the way ivy wraps around brick until the wall beneath can't breathe. Lindsay. I said you and Eric built a life beyond your means, assuming I would always shoulder the overflow. I won't do that anymore. She stared at me as if expecting the sentence to reverse itself. This is irresponsible, she said finally. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking clearly for the first time in years. Something cold flickered behind her eyes. If you're not willing to reverse those changes, we'll have to explore other options such as I asked, though I already knew people like Lindsay always had one threat tucked away, polished, and ready. Legal oversight, she said. Financial guardianship. If you're making decisions that harm the family or yourself, I held up a hand. Stop. She froze mid-sentence. Do you know what the bank told me yesterday? I asked quietly. That I am the only person with access, that I hold full authority, and that there were attempts, multiple attempts, to request permissions on my accounts without proper justification. Her cheeks flushed. I was helping. No, I said. You were preparing. Silence pulled between us. She looked at me then, not with irritation, but something far more revealing. Fear. Not of me, but of the shifting ground beneath her. Of a future where I was not an endless resource. I'm not your adversary, she said at last, her voice softer. I just want stability. We all do, I replied. But stability built on someone else's eraser is not stability. It's dependence disguised as normal. Her shoulders drooped just slightly, the first crack in her certainty. Please, she said, finally reconsider. I shook my head. No, Lindsay, I won't reconsider being treated as if my life belongs to someone else. She stood very still. Then without another word, she picked up her purse and walked toward the door. At the threshold, she paused as if waiting for the old version of me to call her back. I didn't. The door closed softly. Not a slam, not an exit made in triumph or anger, just an ending. And when the silence returned, it felt like breath returning to a long, compressed lung. I was not fragile, not. I was not confused. I was not theirs to manage. I was simply, finally, myself. 2 days passed before Eric came again, not with the frantic urgency of before, nor with Lindsay's polished certainty. He came slowly walking up the path, with his hands in his pockets, shoulders rounded as if the winter air weighed differently on him now. He looked like a man approaching a truth he could no longer outrun. He knocked only once. When I opened the door, he didn't step inside immediately. He stood there studying my face, searching perhaps for anger or softness or an opening. But I had none of those ready for him. I had only honesty. Mom, he said quietly, can we talk? I nodded and stepped aside. He moved into the living room, but instead of sitting on the sofa as usual, he hovered near Walter's recliner, the seat he never took. Then almost reluctantly, he lowered himself into it. The gesture startled me more than anything he'd said recently. It was as if he needed the memory of his father at his back. For a moment, he didn't speak. He just rubbed his palms together, slow, unsteady circles. I've been thinking, he said finally, voice low, about everything you said, about what I said, about the way things have been. I waited. Silence is not empty when used carefully. Sometimes it becomes a mirror. When Dad died, he continued staring at his hands. I thought I had to take care of everything. I thought I was supposed to protect you. But somewhere along the way, I guess I started believing the only way to help was to control. He exhaled shakily. And then, when you kept helping us when money solved the problems I didn't know how to handle, I let that become the norm. I told myself it was temporary. Then I stopped questioning it. Still, I didn't speak. He looked up at me, then really looked, and I saw something unfamiliar in his eyes. Not the entitlement, not the impatience, something deeper, something closer to the boy he once was. The one who ran barefoot through the yard and clung to my apron when thunder shook the windows. I didn't realize how far it had gone, he whispered. How much I relied on you, how much we all did, and how little I gave back. His voice cracked. That night, the dinner, I should have invited you. I should have told Lindsay I wasn't going without you. I should have, I don't know, been better. You could have, I said quietly, but you didn't. He nodded, swallowing hard. I know. The words were not a defense. They were an admission. Then came the sentence he had been circling around. I miss how we used to be. I felt it, a soft ache, not sharp enough to wound, but strong enough to remind. We can't go back, I told him gently, but going forward is still possible. He wiped at his eyes, embarrassed. I don't know how to fix what I broke. You start, I said, by standing on your own feet and by seeing me as someone who still stands on hers. He nodded again, slower this time. The kind of nod a man makes when he finally stops running from himself. Mom, he said, voice thick, do you still love me? I sat back, letting the truth settle in my chest before offering it. Of course I do, I said, but love without respect feels like shadow. I need the substance back. He closed his eyes. A single tear slid down his cheek. Not dramatic, not childish, just a quiet recognition of what he'd nearly lost. I want to do better, he whispered. For you, for myself. I believe you can, I replied, but it will take time and consistency and honesty. He nodded, absorbing each word. For the first time in years, the silence between us didn't feel strained. It felt possible. Before leaving, he hesitated at the door. Can I come back? He asked softly. Not for anything, just a visit. When you come as my son, I said, you're always welcome. He nodded again, grateful, humbled, and walked down the steps slowly as though he didn't want to break the moment. When the door closed, I felt something in the air shift. Not forgiveness, yet not resolution, but something softer. Something beginning a door, reopening not to the past, but to a future shaped by truth instead of silence. The days that followed were quieter than I expected, not empty. That was the old kind of quiet, the kind that settles when you're waiting for someone who never comes. This new quiet was different. It had shape. It had breath. It felt like a room finally returned to its proper owner. I moved through my routines at a gentler pace. I went for short walks even when the air was sharp against my cheeks. I brewed tea in the evenings and allowed myself to sit without purpose. No one to prepare, for no expectation tugging at the hem of my thoughts. It's a strange thing discovering how much space another person's needs can occupy in your life. And stranger still to find that once that space empties, you don't collapse into it. You expand. One afternoon, I found myself in the attic sorting through boxes I'd been avoiding for years. Not emotional boxes. Those belonged to another time, but the practical ones. Old curtains, winter coats, a few tools Walter kept, even after he stopped fixing things. Dust floated in the angled sunlight, softened memories. I picked up a faded quilt my mother had sewn decades ago. The stitches were uneven, the colors mismatched, but holding it felt like opening a window into a life I'd once lived. Simpler, poorer, but somehow more honest. I realized standing there that my life had been paused for so long, suspended between grief and obligation, and now slowly it was unfreezing. Later that week, I joined a community book circle at the library. Nothing elaborate. 6 women around my age reading short novels and talking about them the way women talk when they no longer feel the need to impress anyone. Their voices were soft, warm, carrying the weight of years, lived fully, painfully, bravely. When I spoke, they listened. Not out of pity, out of interest. It surprised me how much that mattered. I started going on small outings, the farmer's market, a local art fair, even a pottery workshop, where my hands molded clay with the awkwardness of someone learning to exist again. I wasn't good at it, but skill wasn't the point. Feeling myself in the world again was enough. One evening as I left the library, a snow flurry dusted the street. I stood beneath a street lamp and watched each flake drift down slowly, as if the world had decided to move at my pace instead of rushing past me. A little boy tugged his mother's hand nearby, laughing as the snow settled on his hat. Life so ordinary, yet so full. On my walk home, I passed the bakery. Walter and I used to visit on Saturday mornings. I hadn't stepped inside since he died, but the scent warm bread and cinnamon wrapped around me in a way that softened the old ache. I bought 2 pastries and ate one on the walk, savoring the simple pleasure of doing something small for myself. It struck me then, I wasn't becoming someone new. I was returning to someone I had been long before life demanded too much of me. That night, I rearranged a corner of the living room, moved a chair closer to the window, placed a stack of books on the table, set a vase with fresh chrysanthemums beside Walter's old photo. A quiet space, a claiming of ground. The phone rang once. Eric checking in, not asking for anything, not circling around a favor, just a short call, an honest one. "Hi, Mom. How are you feeling today?" Better, I told him. Lighter. He hesitated. I'm glad. And I believed him. After the call, I sat in my new corner and let myself feel the truth of these small changes. Nothing dramatic. Nothing cinematic, but real. Life wasn't suddenly bright or easy, but it was mine again, inch by inch. And that at 78 was a quiet triumph I didn't need to announce to anyone. I had expected the final shift to come quietly the way most changes arrive at my age, but life has a way of offering its last lessons with a kind of gentleness, as if it knows you can't carry anything heavy anymore. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. The sky was pale, almost white, the kind of sky that makes the world look softer. I was in my small corner by the window reading one of the books from the library circle when I heard footsteps on the porch, hesitant, slow, almost careful. When I opened the door, Eric and Anna stood there together. He wasn't holding his shoulders like armor this time. He looked almost shy, like he wasn't sure I'd want to see him. Anna stood close, but not protective, simply present her hand resting lightly on his arm. "Hi, Mom," he said. "Hello, Eric. Can we come in?" Of course. They stepped inside, and the 3 of us sat at the table. My kitchen had hosted heavier moments, but this one carried a different weight. Not sorrow, not confrontation, just truth. Wanting a place to sit. Eric cleared his throat, then tried again. I've been thinking a lot these last few weeks. Really thinking. Not the way I used to. Rushing to fix whatever felt uncomfortable, but sitting with things. His fingers traced the grain of the table the way Walter used to when he searched for words. I didn't realize how much I'd leaned on you or how little I gave back. I didn't interrupt. I didn't soften the silence. I simply waited. "I'm sorry," he said. Not rushed, not defensive, but with a steady sincerity that didn't need decoration. Not just for the dinner, for all the years I didn't see you, for assuming you'd always make room for my needs, even when there was no room left for yours. His voice thinned with emotion. You deserved better from me. Anna placed her hand over his, grounding him the way Walter used to ground me with a single steady look. "I know you're not asking for anything," Eric continued. but I want. He stopped searching for words. I want to build a different relationship with you, one that isn't built on taking. I let the quiet stretch. Then I reached across the table and touched his hand lightly. I believe you, I said, and believing you is enough for today. He nodded relief, softening his features. We talked a little more about nothing urgent, about his work, about Anna's studies, about the book I was reading. The kind of conversation families have when they trust each other enough not to need anything from one another except presence. Before leaving, they hugged me, not out of guilt, not out of fear, but out of love. Rediscovered different love. Grown-up love. Love that doesn't demand or assume, but simply stands. When the door closed behind them, the house felt warm again. Not because anything dramatic had changed, but because something essential had finally settled into its rightful place, dignity mine and his. I walked back to my little reading corner and sat down, letting the winter lights spill across my lap. I felt a kind of peace I hadn't known in years. Not the peace that comes from being needed, but the peace that comes from being whole. My life wasn't perfect. It never had been. But it was mine now. Every inch of it, every choice, every boundary, every quiet morning and gentle evening. And I thought to myself, not with triumph, but with calm satisfaction. I didn't win anything. I simply stopped losing myself. As the sun dipped lower, I closed my book and looked out the window, watching the faint shimmer of frost settle along the fence line. A woman can rebuild her dignity at any age. A mother can reclaim herself even after years of being overlooked. And a family can grow again, not from obligation, but from honesty. If you've been quiet too long, if you've shrunk yourself to make room for others, if you've mistaken usefulness for love, let my story be a small reminder. It is never too late to choose yourself, never too late to stand up gently, never too late to reclaim your life with steady, quiet hands. And if this touched something in you, share it, tell someone, or leave a word behind. Stories like ours shouldn't be lived in silence.